Hello there. We'll be talking about body fluid compartment in today's lecture. Now, by way of introduction, uh, water is the most abundant component of the body. It is essential for life in all human beings and animals and plants as well. Water is the only solvent of the body in which electrolytes and other non-electrolyte solutes are dissolved and in which all essential biochemical processes occur. Humans are approximately 75% of water by mass as infants, but this will have reduced to about 60% by mass as adults. So it means uh, every one of you adults listen to this lecture, you are about 60% water. In a lean individual, yes, the water is about 60%, but people who have more fat, the water content might be lower because fat contains less water. Therefore, obese individuals might have water content of as low as 55% of their total body weight. But for the physiological male, right, a 70 kg lean person, lean man will contain about 42 liters of water, which is about that's just 60% of 70 kilograms. That will give 42 liters. Now, let's talk about the distribution of body fluid. The total body water is distributed between two major compartments. We have the extracellular fluid, that is the fluid that is outside the cell, and we have the intracellular fluid, that is this fluid or water that is within the cell. And each of these, I should note that about 2/3 of the total body water is confined to the intracellular compartment, and 1/3 to the extracellular fluid. All right, so this is referring to the 60-40-20 rule. Right, this rule says that 60% or the water comprises 60% of total body weight, right, and 40% of the total body weight is in the intracellular compartment, whereas the 20% is within the extracellular compartment. So this 60% is composed of this 40 and 20%, the 60-40-20 rule. Now, the intracellular fluid is the total space within cells defined by the cytoplasm of cells. And intracellular fluids are stable generally and do not readily adjust to rapid changes in either in volume or in composition. Now, the intracellular space is where many chemical reactions occur, and so it's important to maintain an appropriate osmolality. The extracellular fluid compartment is divided into the following subdivisions. We have plasma, which is about 5% total body water, interstitial fluid, and lymph. Is about now plasma. Okay, what is plasma? Plasma is the fluid component of blood, right? Blood is a liquid, right, that contains several things. We have cells such as red blood cells and white blood cells. It contains proteins, contains nutrients, and many other things, right? But everything within it is within a liquid. So that fluid part of it is plasma, and it accounts for 5% of total body water. We have interstitial fluid and lymph together make up 15% of total body water. Interstitial fluid is the fluid in between tissues. Okay, so let me give an example. If you were to if you are stung by an insect or bitten by an insect, and the bite starts leaking out water that is not actually blood, right? That is an example of interstitial fluid, because it's blood. It's a water, is a liquid that comes from that is actually in your tissue, but it's not blood. It's not in your veins or arteries, right? So that's an example of interstitial fluid. All right. Now, bone and dense connective tissue also contain water. So bone, as hard as it is, it contains water. Then we have what we refer to as transcellular fluid. which have several examples, like cerebrospinal fluid within the central nervous system. We have pleural fluid, peritoneal fluid, digestive secretions, and so on. Now there are other possible fluid spaces in pathological scenarios. Those are in scenarios of disease, and they can be transudate or exudate. Now this cartoon illustrates the division of total body water. We can see what we were talking about earlier. That remember the 60-40-20 rule, that the 60% of body weight is made up of water, 40% 40 from the 60 is made up of intracellular fluid, and 20% is extracellular fluid, whereas the 20% is itself divided into 15% for interstitial fluid, about 5% for plasma. Okay, something similar here. Alright, so now of these subdivisions, the plasma and interstitial fluids are the most important because of constant exchange of fluid and electrolytes between them. They are separated by the plasma and interstitial fluid are separated by the capillary endothelium. Now remember that we said that plasma is the water within blood, right? And blood vessels, arteries, and veins, they run within tissues. All right, and we said that interstitial fluid is the fluid within tissues. So it means that as an artery or a vein is running within a tissue, it's the outside of the artery or vein will be in contact with the fluid within the tissues. Right. So what will separate that fluid within tissues, called interstitial fluid, and the fluid within the blood in the artery or vein, which is the plasma, will be the capillary endothelium. That is the structure, the stuff that makes up the wall of the artery or veins. That is the capillary endothelium. Alright, so plasma circulates in the blood vessels, whereas the interstitial fluid bathes all tissue cells except for the formed elements of blood. Right, the formed elements of blood are within plasma, but all other tissue cells are within interstitial fluid. Now, let's talk about composition of body fluid. The exact chemical composition of body fluid it varies widely depending on the particular area of the body we are considering. Right, the extracellular fluid and interstitial fluid are similar in composition. Extracellular fluids and interstitial fluid are similar in composition. Extracellular spaces contain high concentrations of sodium, chloride, bicarbonate, and proteins, but are relatively lower in potassium, magnesium, and phosphates. Whereas interstitial fluids, physiologically, they tend to have a low concentration of proteins. Intracellular fluids tend to have a high level of phosphate, magnesium, potassium, proteins, but lower sodium, chloride, and bicarbonate. Now, intracellular fluid, it's like we said, it's 2/3 of total body water. Right? Remember that again, the 60-40-20 rule. Right? Intracellular fluid is the 40, right, which is 2/3 of the 60. So it's 2/3 of total body water. Major cations are potassium and magnesium. The major anions are proteins and organic phosphates, adenosine diphosphates, ATP, ADP, and AMP. All right. The extracellular fluid is 1/3. Now, 60-40-20 rule. 20 is 1/3 of 60. It's composed of interstitial fluid and plasma. Major cation is sodium. Major anions are chloride and bicarbonate. And solid and water travel between interstitial fluid and plasma, between the pores or the holes in the endothelial cells of the capillaries. Now, plasma proteins, which are negatively charged, are too large to travel through the pores, and so they, in normal health, right? In normal health, plasma proteins stay within the within the intravascular compartment, within the arteries or veins. And electroneutrality is maintained by repelling small anions into interstitial fluid and attracting small cations into plasma. This is referred to as a Gibbs Donnan effect. Just to talk briefly on this, because the large negatively charged proteins cannot move from the plasma into the interstitial fluid. They are large and negatively charged. And there's something called the law of electroneutrality, which maintains that the electrical charge on both sides of a biological membrane must be equal, right? They must be equal, and so without this Gibbs-Donnan effect, you have a situation where you have a negatively charged, where the inside of the vessels, inside of the arteries or veins, right, the intravascular compartment, you have a situation where it is predominantly negatively charged because of the large proteins that are negatively charged. So, but because of electroneutrality, because electroneutrality must be maintained, the large proteins will attract, which are what they are anions, all right. They will attract cations, which are positive ions, from the interstitial fluid across the membrane into the. They will tend to attract cations from interstitial fluid across the membrane into the intravascular compartment. And remember that in physics we say that like charges repel. Okay, so these large negatively charged proteins will tend to repel and push anions, that's negative ions, small negative ions, from the intravascular compartment into the interstitial space, right? So that is the Gibbs-Donnan effect, that because of the large negatively charged proteins that cannot move across membranes, then they will tend to push small negatively charged molecules called anions, which can move across membranes. They'll tend to push them away from where they are and draw small positively charged ions, which are called cations. They draw them to themselves because like charges repel and unlike charges attract. Okay, so this situation leads to interstitial fluid having increased small anion concentration, e.g. chloride. Remember that the large negatively charged proteins are within plasma. All right, and like we said, they will push the small negatively charged ions, that is anions, which can move across membrane. They'll push them outside from. They push them from inside the plasma into the interstitial fluid, and this is what results. The interstitial fluid has increased quantity of small anions and decreased quantity of small cations. All right, now plasma is 1/4 of the extracellular fluid. Thus, it is 1/12 of. Remember that we said that plasma is about 5%. Is about 5% of, whereas interstitial fluid is about 15%. That's of the extracellular fluid. So 5% is 1/4 of the extracellular fluid. Okay. And it's about 1/12. So 5 divided by 60. That's about 1/12 of total body water. All right. So the major plasma proteins are albumin and globulins. Now, interstitial fluid is 3/4 of the extracellular fluid. Thus, it is 1/4 of total body water. That's 15, because interstitial fluid is 15%, right? Divided by 60%, that's 1/4. Now, the composition of interstitial fluid is the same as that of plasma, except that it has little protein. Remember what we said earlier too, that yes, the proteins that are inside the blood, they cannot move across the membranes, and so that's the chief difference between interstitial fluid and the plasma. And thus we say that interstitial fluid is an ultrafiltrate of plasma. Okay, this is the 60-40-20 rule again. All right, now let's talk about volumes of body fluid compartments. Now these are determined by administering and measuring concentration of substances that are known to settle in specific compartment. This is the dilution method. Now we've talked about body fluid compartments. Yes, the extracellular fluid compartment, the intracellular fluid compartment. We've talked about interstitial fluid compartment. Talk about plasma and so on. All right. So if you are to have a substance that you know that once this substance gets into the human body, it will naturally collect to actually naturally settle in a specific compartment. You can use that knowledge to calculate the volume of such a compartment. Now, some substances used for specific compartments include heavy water, also called titrated water. That's D2O for total body water. Radio-labeled albumin for plasma, because we know, again, albumin is a protein. So, and we know that in normal state of things, normal health, albumin will not leave plasma. So if you are to inject albumin, in this case radio-labeled albumin, into the blood, it will stay within the blood if the patient is healthy. We also have advanced blue that is can also be used for plasma volume. Then mannitol and inulin for interstitial fluid, because they will not pass through the cell membranes. All right. So, yes, those substances are introduced into the compartment of interest, giving time to equilibrate, to spread around and to fill the particular compartment equally. Right. Then we now measure concentrations of this substance in their body fluid compartment, and this measurement can be used to calculate the volume of such a compartment. All right, and the formula used is basically the volume is equal to the amount of the substance given over the measured concentration after it has equilibrated. All right, to account for loss of these substances in urine, because the previous formula is under the assumption that all of the substance given will stay within the compartment. But in actual fact, we know that if you inject any substance that is not meant to be in the body normally, over time, most such substances will eventually be excreted. All right. So in the time taken for you to, after the substances are introduced into the compartment, and time allowed for the substance to move around the compartment and equilibrate, some of the substance might have been excreted in the urine, and so you can account for this by measuring the amount of the substance in the urine. All right, now let's do a sample calculation here. If a patient was injected with 500 milligram of mannitol, okay, after a 2-hour equilibration period. All right, now again, equilibration, like I said, just means that you allow you give time for that substance to move completely throughout the particular compartment. Because okay, imagine I take a substance and I inject it into a vein in my arm. If I was to, for the immediately I finish injecting it, it's obviously it stands to reason that there will be a very high concentration of that substance in my arm. All right, but it will take time for that substance to spread throughout, or to spread evenly throughout the whole of the body, right? Throughout the whole to spread evenly throughout the all the veins and arteries of the body, so it spreads within the plasma evenly. So that is the equilibration period. All right. So for this patient, after the equilibration period, it was found out that the concentration of mannitol in the plasma was 3.2 milligram per deciliter. That's a deciliter is 100 mils. Now, during the equilibration period, it was found that 10% of the injected mannitol was excreted in urine. So, what is the patient's extracellular fluid volume? All right. Now, this is the adjusted formula. In this case, we are trying to calculate the volume of plasma. All right. So the volume will be the amount over the concentration, but the amount you have to adjust it. You have to discount the quantity of the substance that was of the mannitol that was excreted. So amount minus amount excreted over the concentration. So 500 milligram of mannitol was injected. 50 milligram, that is 10%, was lost in the urine. So we have to subtract that, now divide by the plasma concentration that was measured after the equilibration period. So if you execute this equation, you arrive at 14.1 liters. So that is just that's a sample calculation. All right. So some substances used to measure body fluid compartments. Yes, we mentioned some of them. For total body water, tritiated water, also called D2O, antipyrine. As for extracellular fluids, sulfate, inulin, mannitol, plasma. You might use radio labeled albumin and Evans blue. For interstitial fluid, you can measure indirectly by just subtracting plasma volume. You do plasma volume with this, then you do extracellular fluid with this, then just subtract the plasma volume from extracellular fluid, and that will give us the interstitial fluid. Intracellular fluid is also measured indirectly by calculation. Okay, so this is just showing some of those things. All right, now let's talk about water shift between body fluid compartments. Now, in a healthy individual, the extracellular fluid and the intracellular fluid are in osmotic equilibrium, meaning that there's a balance between the osmotically active molecules within these two compartments, right? That there are not two osmotically active molecules are molecules that have the ability to draw water to themselves, right? So that there must be a balance. Otherwise, if there were more osmotically active molecules in one particular compartment compared with the other, then that compartment will draw water out from the other compartment into itself, and so you end up with a situation in which there is abnormally high water in one side, in one particular compartment, whereas the other compartment does not have enough water. So there must be an equilibrium maintained so that there will be no net, that per time there will be no net movement of water molecules across membranes. Now, if this equilibrium is disturbed, water will move from the area of lower solute concentration to the area of lower solute concentration is the area that has more water, that has a higher water concentration. All right, so water will move from the area of lower solute concentration to the area of greater solute concentration in order to reestablish the osmotic equilibrium. Okay, so let's use an example. Now, if you were to take two cups of water, the same cup, like two cups that have the same volume of fluid. Okay, now imagine you are to put in one, you put half a cup of water in both cups. Then inside the first cup, let's call it cup A, you put a teaspoon of salt. But in the second cup, you put 2 teaspoons of salt, meaning you have double the salt content in B compared to A, right? So for the two cups, the salt is the solute and the water is the solvent, right? So, but for cup A has a lower solute concentration, whereas cup B has a higher solute concentration, right? So if you were to pour the half, if this was in a biological system and you have let's consider the following the Daroyanate diagram. Let's look at this. Okay, so let's imagine this is a container, and you have a fluid in this first. Okay, you have a fluid in this first container that has double the solute concentration with this. So it means that because this one has more osmotically active particles, right, and less water, then water will move from the second side to the first one, because there is more, the concentration of water is higher in this side than here, so water will move from its area of high concentration to area of low concentration. So, but mind you, the area where water is high is the area where the solute is low, and the side where solute concentration is high is the area where water concentration is low. Okay. So consider this Daroyanet diagram that shows fluid and osmolality changes in the ECF and ICF compartments following addition of 1 liter of water to the ECF. Now, the initial state is shown by the solid line, that initially, based on volume, remember that we said that the ICF was 60% of total body water and the ECF was 40%, right, of total body water. So that is what is represented by the different size of the boxes that represent each of these compartments. All right, so I'm now saying that if you now pour 1 liter of water into the extracellular fluid, this is the extracellular fluid. Now, before you pour the water, there was an equilibrium established between these two compartments, right? There was the osmotically active, because, for instance, the example of the salt that I was talking about. Now, when you pour salt into water, salt is osmotically active, right? And salt will draw water to itself. So if you add salt within the intracellular fluid, it will tend to draw water from the extracellular fluid into itself until there's a balance, such that the number of osmotically active molecules, the concentration of osmotically active molecules on both sides are balanced. Right, that is where, when we say that an equilibrium has been set. All right. So if you have to disrupt the equilibrium by adding 1 liter of water that doesn't have any osmotically active molecule into the extracellular fluid, now what will happen is that you'd have increased the volume of the extracellular fluid. The volume is represented on the x-axis here, and osmolality on the y-axis. Now, you'd have increased the volume of the extracellular fluid from, initially the volume was from here to here, but because you've added 1 liter of water to it, the volume will increase to this side. But because of this, there will now be a higher concentration of water molecule within the extracellular fluid compartment. Or you may look at the other side of it, that there will now be a lower solute concentration. So whichever way you want to regard it, the fact remains that the water concentration is now higher because we've added 1 liter of water to this part. And remember what we said, diffusion is the movement of molecules from a place of higher concentration to a place of lower concentration. So because we've added 1 liter of water to the extracellular fluid, it will disrupt the equilibrium that had been achieved before now, and so the water concentration in the extracellular fluid will now be higher than the water concentration in the intracellular fluid, and so water will now move across this membrane, assuming that this membrane separating the two compartments is semi-permeable, to allow water to move across until there is a new equilibrium is achieved. So now, because water now moves across, right? That's where the shift in water that will happen when you disrupt this. All right. So the final state will now be, these dotted lines will now be the final state of these two compartments. That at the end of the day, right, you find that the volume of the two compartments would have increased, because the 1 liter that you added to the extracellular fluid, some of it would have moved into the intracellular fluid to achieve the new equilibrium. So because of that, the volume of the two compartments would have increased, right? But their osmolality would have reduced, because you've diluted the two compartments, and so their osmolality would have reduced for both compartments, and so This dotted lines is what you have as the final state. Alright, so let's assume that a lean male that weighs 70 kilograms and has an osmolality in the ECF and ICF as 280 milliosmoles per kg per kilogram of water, and we know that his total body water is 60% of the body weight. Therefore, his total body water is 42 liters. Alright, of this amount, 28 liters is the intracellular fluid, which is which is 40, which is 2/3 of the 42 liters, and 14 liters is the extracellular fluid compartment. Now, what will happen to the osmolality and water distribution in each compartment if we add 1 liter of water to the extracellular fluid? All right, so it's just this diagram again. That what we already said, we added 1 liter to this. What will actually happen? Yeah, this is what will happen. But we want to actually calculate the actual things that will happen in terms of fluid, water distribution, and osmolality. All right. So follow me. Let's do this. So initially, the extra 1 liter of water that was added would increase. It will increase the extracellular fluid. It was added to the extracellular fluid volume. Now it will increase its volume, but it will also decrease its osmolality because it will have diluted it. All right. So it will decrease the osmolality from 280 to 260 milliosmoles per kilogram of water. All right. The total extracellular fluid is 280 times. Now, if you are to multiply to get the total extracellular fluid milliosmoles, remember that we said that the initial. Let's go back and see that the initial osmolality was 250 milliosmoles per kilogram of water, right? Okay. But we said that the extracellular fluid has 14 liters of water, which is 14 kilograms. All right, so it means that since we have 280 milliosmoles per kilogram of water, this is it, per milliosmoles per kilogram of water. So it means that in that 14 liters of water, which is the extracellular fluid, and remember that 1 liter of water is approximately equal to 1 kg of water. So it means that we'll have 14 times 280. So we have a total of 3,920 milliosmoles in the extracellular fluid initially. All right. So now, because we now added water to it, 1 liter of water, it now means that the new water content is no longer 14 liters but 15 liters. All right, so when we now divide the 3,920 milliosmoles by 15 liters, rather than this initial 14 liters, it gives us 261 milliosmoles. And so when we add 1 liter of water to this individual, to this subject, when we add 1 liter of water to their extracellular fluid volume, we are going to reduce the extracellular fluid osmolality from 280 milliosmoles per kilogram of water to 261. All right, that's what we've just done in this calculation. All right, now since the intracellular fluid osmolality is still 280 milliosmoles per kilogram of water, it means that the osmolality of the intracellular fluid is higher than this new extracellular fluid osmolality. All right, and so water will now, because the osmolality is higher in the intracellular fluid, water will move into the intracellular fluid, right, until a new osmotic equilibrium is reached. All right, so the extracellular fluid that we added water to, that has now reduced in osmolality, it now means that the concentration of water, whereas the concentration of osmotically active molecules has reduced, but the concentration of water has increased, and so water will move from this extracellular fluid that we added 1 liter of water to, and move into the intracellular fluid until we reach a new osmotic equilibrium. Okay, so because of this, the intracellular fluid volume will also increase, and the net result is that there will be an increase in volume and a decrease in osmolality in both compartments. Now, Remember that the intracellular fluid osmolality was initially 280 times 28, which was 7,840. Okay, now when you divide that 7,840, which was the what's it called, the initial number of milliosmoles within the intracellular fluid compartment. Okay, we now divide that by the new osmolality, so that will be 7,840 divided by 273, okay, which will give us 28.72 liters. And so the initial volume of the intracellular fluid compartment was 28 liters, but because we added 1 liter of water to the extracellular fluid compartment, and and there was equilibration, and water moved from the extracellular fluid compartment into the intracellular fluid compartment, and thus the final volume of the intracellular fluid compartment is what we just arrived at, 28.7 liters, as opposed to the initial 28 liters. All right, so we can do something similar too for the extracellular fluid compartment. But if we did it, we would have arrived at what an extra 0.28 liters. And so if the initial volume of the extracellular fluid compartment was 14 liters, it will end up as 14.28 liters. Okay. Now we should note that these changes are significant. They are insignificant in an individual that has normal renal function, since the kidneys will compensate for these changes by excreting excess water in order to maintain fluid balance. Okay, so if somebody whose kidneys are functioning, the kidneys would not allow these changes in the composition of the fluid compartment to stand, because the excess water, the healthy functioning kidney is able to excrete it, and so the kidneys will actually return the equilibrium to the physiological range, and so within a short time, the functioning kidneys will get rid of excess water and everything goes back to how it was. All right, so now shifts are characterized by changes in volume and concentration of the extracellular fluid, as we've just demonstrated in this example. So if the extracellular fluid volume, if it increases, that leads to an expansion. If it decreases, that leads to a contraction. All right. Now, increased extracellular fluid osmolarity is referred to as hyperosmotic changes, and decrease is hyposmotic changes. If there are no changes, then we say the extracellular fluid is isosmotic. Now, with this in mind, there are 6 possible combinations of changes in the volume and osmolarity. Now, there could be volume contraction or volume expansion. Now, for volume contraction, we might have isosmotic volume contraction, right, in which the volume the volume of the extracellular fluid reduces, but there is no change in the osmotic concentration. All right, so this happens when there is loss of isosmotic fluid from the extracellular fluid, right? So the fluid that is lost has the same constituent of the extracellular fluid. So when you lose it, there will be no change. There will be change in volume because the extracellular fluid compartment has lost volume, but there will be no change in osmolarity because the volume lost was isosmotic. So the volume reduced, but osmolarity is constant. So there will be no water shift. All right. It will lead to decrease in plasma volume and decrease in arterial pressure and increase in plasma protein concentration and hematocrit. Now remember that in a healthy person, that plasma proteins will not be lost. Will not be lost, and so the plasma proteins, they will not be lost along with the fluid lost. So plasma content will still remain within the plasma, but since the water content of the plasma has reduced, it will mean that the effective concentration of the plasma protein will have increased. See, it's the difference between adding if you pour a spoon of water, a tablespoon of salt into a cup of water, now, and you are to measure the concentration of the salt, that sodium chloride in that cup of water, right? If you and you get a specific value, but imagine that you now take that cup of water. Let's imagine it's a metal cup, and you put it on a burner, and you start boiling. If you are to boil for say 15 minutes, and say a third of the water has evaporated away, now remember that during evaporation the salt will not evaporate along with water, it's just water alone that will evaporate. Okay, so you have arrived at a situation where you still have the same amount of salt within that water, but the water has reduced in volume. All right, and if you were to now measure the concentration of sodium chloride of salt in that water, you find out that it is higher because the volume of the water has reduced, but the amount of salt has not changed. All right, so this is what is happening here to plasma proteins when there is isosmotic volume contraction, because the proteins were not lost, just as the salt, when you are boiling the salt solution, the salt will not be lost, will not go along, will not evaporate. In this case too, the plasma proteins will not be lost, so the plasma proteins will now become more concentrated. Right now, an example of a situation where you may have isosmotic volume contraction is in diarrhea, because when an individual is having loose watery stools, the water being lost in the stool has the same osmolar concentration as plasma. All right, so the volume goes down, but there's no water shift. Now, the second scenario is that of hyposmotic volume contraction. Remember that we've been talking about volume contraction. And the first scenario we gave was that of isosmotic volume contraction. Now we are talking about hyposmotic volume contraction, in which we have loss of hyposmotic fluid from the extracellular fluid. Hyposmotic fluid, again, is just a fluid that has a lesser osmolality compared with that of plasma. All right, so in this scenario, because there has been a volume loss, the volume will reduce and osmolarity will increase. The osmolarity will increase. Why is the osmolarity increasing? Is because it's almost the scenario I gave earlier. When I was talking, when I give an example, an illustration of adding sodium chloride to water, to a container of water, and measuring the osmolarity, then boiling that container of water until a certain amount of the water has evaporated. Right now, remember that we concluded that the osmolarity of that container of water will actually increase because the salt was not lost along with the water. When water is boiled, salt will not evaporate along with it. All right, and so the volume of the salt inside the container will remain unchanged. It's just the volume of water that has reduced. Now, this situation is almost similar in the sense that, okay, although for the salt and boiling, the water lost has no salt at all in it. Right, it has zero salt in it. But in this particular scenario, the fluid loss still has salt in it, but it still has not salt. It still has osmotically active molecules in it, right? But because it is hyposmotic, the water loss still has osmotically active molecules in it, but it's hyposmotic, meaning that the concentration is not as high as that of plasma, and so the end result will still be an increase in osmolarity of the plasma. And because of that, water will shift into the plasma from the intracellular fluid, right? And the plasma volume will reduce, and arterial pressure will also reduce, will also decrease, right? Now, plasma proteins concentration will go up, right? Because the plasma proteins is not lost along with the hyposmotic fluid that is lost. So the quantity of the concentration of the amount of plasma proteins within the plasma remains constant, but since the volume of the plasma has reduced, therefore the concentration of the plasma protein will increase, but hematocrit will remain unchanged. Why? Because the red blood cells will also lose volume too. The red blood cells will also lose volume too. And why does this happen? Because since the plasma osmolality has gone up, that's what we just said here, that the osmolality of the extracellular fluid will increase. Now, this plasma osmolality that has gone up will lead to a situation where water comes from out of the red blood cells to enter into the extracellular fluid. In this case, that's the plasma, right? Since the osmolality of the plasma of the extracellular fluid has increased, right? Then water will move from inside the cell to the extracellular fluid, and so because of that, the hematocrit does not change. Now, example of hyposmotic volume contraction is what happens during heavy sweating, because sweat, even though sweat is salty, anybody who has ever tasted sweat will know that it has osmotically active substance molecules within it, and you can actually taste that sweat is salty. But compared with plasma, sweat is hyposmotic, right? And so it will lead to hyposmotic volume contraction. Now, the third example is when we have hyperosmotic volume contraction, when there's a loss of hyperosmotic fluid from the extracellular fluid. Okay, and the result of this is that, of course, there will be a volume decrease, there will be a reduction in volume, and there will also be a reduction in osmolarity as well. And this will lead to what? To water to shift. Because of reduction in osmolarity, it now means that there is now a higher water concentration within the extracellular fluid, and that water will now shift from the extracellular fluid into the intracellular fluid compartment. Okay, so this will now result in reduction in plasma volume, reduction in arterial pressure, and an increase in plasma protein concentration and hematocrit, because again the plasma protein does not move, will not move, cannot move from outside the arteries or veins, outside the intravascular compartment, and so whenever there is a fluid loss, the plasma protein concentration will always go up, at least in healthy states. If there is nothing, there's no pathological conditions with affecting the arteries or veins, all right, and the hematocrit will also increase. The hematocrit will also increase because first of all, we said that the osmolarity has gone down, has reduced, all right, and so there is more water, there's a higher water concentration in the extracellular fluid. So because of that, as the water will also shift from inside the plasma to enter into the red blood cells, and so the red blood cells actually swell up, they increase in size, they increase in volume, and right. So this, along with the reduction in the volume of the plasma, will lead overall to an increased hematocrit. So hematocrit increases from one, the reduction in volume of the plasma, and this is analogous to the situation I use as the scenario I gave as an example, where if you boil water that has salt inside and the water is lost, right? Water is lost, but the salt remains. So it eventually the concentration of that salt water will increase, since you've lost water but you've not lost salt. All right. So in this, applying that here, when you lose water from the plasma, just water alone, right? That will tend to cause a increase in hematocrit, since you are not losing red blood cells. All right. Of course, this might be balanced by you losing water from the red blood cells, as happened in the hyposmotic volume contraction. But in this particular case, right, the red blood cells actually gain water, but since the plasma uh, is now hyposmolar, that the osmolality of the plasma has reduced, and so the water content of the plasma has increased, and so that excess water, some of it will make its way the uh, into the red blood cells, and so hematocrit will increase. All right, so this shows this illustration. This diagram show what we're talking about. Uh, the various scenarios, right? The volume contraction, volume reduction. Now, uh, okay. So okay, let's look at this for instance now. When you had in this particular case, right? If you had isosmotic, if you remove we have isosmotic volume loss from the extracellular fluid. All right, this is what happens there. All right. So based on what we've said earlier, there will be no movement there will be no water movement since the water loss was isosmotic. All right. But if it is hyperosmotic volume loss from the extracellular fluid, there will be water movement from the intracellular fluid to the extracellular fluid. If it is hyposmotic volume loss, all right, the net result will be water will flow from the extracellular fluid to the intracellular fluid, as we've explained in the previous slides. All right, now the second broader scenario is when there is a volume expansion. All right, now there may be you may have isosmotic volume expansion when there will be a gain of isosmotic fluid in the extracellular fluid. Yeah, in this case, right, there will be an increase in volume, but the osmolarity will remain constant, so there is no water shift. All right, there is increased volume, plasma volume, and arterial pressure. The plasma volume and arterial pressure will increase since there is a volume expansion. Now the plasma protein concentration will decrease. Again, this stands to reason because, as it were, we are diluting the concentration, the plasma protein, so their concentration will go down. Hematocrit will also decrease because we are diluting the red blood cells. Okay, so an example of this scenario is what happens when someone is receiving an infusion of isotonic sodium chloride solution, and referred to as normal saline. Now, the second scenario under volume expansion is that of hyperosmotic volume expansion, when the extracellular fluid gains hyperosmotic fluid. Now, in this case, there will be an increase in volume and an increase in osmolarity, since the the incoming fluid has a higher osmolarity than the extracellular fluid, and so this will lead to a shift of water from the intracellular fluid into the extracellular fluid to try and equilibrate the osmolarity, to try and achieve a new equilibrium. Now, the plasma volume will increase and the arterial pressure will also increase, but the plasma protein concentration and hematocrit will go down because of the dilutional effects of the water that shifts into the extracellular fluid from the intracellular fluid. An example of how this scenario might occur is when an individual eats very salty food. Now, the final scenario is that of hyposmotic volume expansion, when there is gain of hyposmotic fluid into the extracellular fluid. Now, in this scenario, the volume goes up, whereas the osmolarity reduces, and this leads to a shift of water from the extracellular fluid into the intracellular fluid compartment. Okay, the plasma volume will increase and the arterial pressure will also increase. There will be a decrease in plasma protein concentration because the overall effect is of volume expansion. So the plasma protein concentration will also decrease, but the hematocrit remains unchanged. Okay. Now, an example of this is when you have okay, this is when you have two much antidiuretic hormone, causing excessive water reabsorption, such as that seen in a syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone, SIADH. Okay, now this shows what we've talked about, the three scenarios of volume expansion. Okay, just as we've discussed, when the volume expansion is isosmotic, there is no net flow of water in this first instance. In the second instance, when the volume expansion is hyperosmotic, it will lead to a water flow from the intracellular fluid to the extracellular fluid. But when the volume expansion is due to addition of hyposmotic fluid, to lead to a water flow from the extracellular fluid to the intracellular fluid. Okay, with that, we have come to the end of this lecture. Thank you very much for listening.